Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this very important session of dtalks. I'm Mashood, your host. As we continue conversations and the mitigation efforts towards dealing with the short-term impacts of COVID on our education system, there are also conversations and estimates of a lot of long-term impacts in education, and a lot of them are very distressing. But at the same time, we are seeing that governments, organizations, policymakers are having conversations and designing efforts to deal with the long-term efforts towards building back education. But when we are talking about building back education in the long term, what are the goals that we want to achieve? Do we want to go back to the original system of education that we had pre-pandemic, or are we thinking of something fundamentally different? And in a world where we are now very well aware of the effects of pandemics, we also know that this is not the very last pandemic. And making sure that our children and the future of our country and the world are resilient, it's very important to kind of reimagine education in a fundamentally different way. And this is what we are going to speak on today. And to speak on this, we have a leading organization that's working in life skills, Dream Foundation. And it has been working for many years now on empowering children and young people from vulnerable backgrounds to overcome adversity through development of 21st century life skills. And Dream, of course, has a very creative approach to achieve that. So it's an absolute honor for us to have two leading members from the organization. Our first speaker is Mr. Vishal Talreja. He's the co-founder of Dream. And he's also been an Ashoka Fellow and Eisenhower Fellow and a board member at PY Global and Gunj. And he's previously been a founder director of Unlimited India and a board member at India Cares as well, and also a TEDx speaker. Also joining us is Ms. Suchetha Bhat. She's the CEO of Dream. And she, in fact, started her journey with Dream as a volunteer and now is a chief executive officer. So it's quite an amazing journey. And she's also in the advisory council of Amani Institute as well. So it's an absolute honor for us to welcome both of you, Vishal and Suchetha. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Mashur. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, Vishal and Suchetha. So just to start the conversation, we are talking about rebuilding back better in education, and we are talking about how there are certain like very pressing short-term problems which our children are facing, but we are also talking about how pandemic has fundamentally shifted the socio-economic order of the world, and consequently education will also have to adapt to that. What would your thoughts be about when we talk about building back better for education? What should be the approach? What are we trying to achieve? And is it something which again goes back to pre-pandemic education system, or is it something which is fundamentally different? Your thoughts, Vishal and Suchetha.
Suchetha, you want to go first?
Sure. So this is what I've been saying, Mashud. One is to say, let's build back better, which we must, but also can we reimagine education systems to build back completely different, right? I think we all acknowledge that the education systems as it were, especially in a country like India, where you have 130 million children living in poverty, it really wasn't working, and we had enough data to back that. So can we really reimagine it and build back fundamentally different? And there were three lenses from which I see this. One is, we always said that the future is unpredictable. The jobs of the future require different types of skills than what school is doing, right? There was this imagination of 10, 15 years down the line, the future that our children were entering. What the pandemic has shown us is the future is here. We are living already in a complex, uncertain world. And are we doing enough in terms of building the life skills of children to be able to respond to it with a sense of resilience, empathy, adaptability, right? So the future is here. What are education systems doing to prepare children for it? Second is the pandemic, like you said, it's one of many, and the different types of pandemic in terms of the climate crisis and all the fallouts of that is again staring at us in our face. So are we ready to now look beyond just economic models of growth? Right? Are we willing to look beyond education just to get a job, just to get financial security, just to have a society which is based more on well-being, more on emotional resilience, emotional quotient, and not just focus on economic growth? And what is the role then education plays to prepare children to build a society that is not only measured using GDP or economic measures of growth, but well-being and happiness and contentment and all of that. And finally, the third is that the pandemic has also shown us the extent of systemic inequities. We always knew that children coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds, depending on which marginalized group they belong to, the quality of education they're receiving is different. That has just become much more starkly visible to us with the digital access. There was just no looking away from the fact that digital access as a single point of measure showed us the extent of systemic inequity in terms of access to education itself. So can we now, while we build back different, take that into account, that there are children who are coming from poverty, there are children who are coming from marginalized backgrounds, that they don't have access to the same level of quality and privileges and even just devices that a child from a mainstream education has. So how is education then being designed for them, for the most marginalized children, versus the top 10% who are already doing well and now have just moved much further ahead in the pandemic, while the rest of the children are being left behind? So I think there are these big fundamental existential questions we are looking at. The pandemic has given us a chance to pause, reflect, think about what we want to do differently. And that would be, my invitation, that when we start looking at now reopening schools, start bringing back children, ask ourselves what is the purpose of education, that we take some of these big glaring problems into account and not just do incremental improvements. Vishal,
yes, Vishal, would you like to make your opening statement?
Sure. I think Suchetha has covered most of the points I would have made too. Just a couple of lenses I want to add. One is in 2015, the Brookings Institution had come up with a report called Why Wait 100 Years? And their own research had told that if we continue with the same educational approaches, the one-size-fits-all approaches that we have across the world, it's going to take 6 generations or a minimum of 100 years for children from marginalized backgrounds or children from developing countries to catch up to the current levels of educational attainment of children from privileged or children from developed countries. And their recommendation around that was that what we have to do in education is leapfrogging as a strategy, not incremental change. And the pandemic, as Suchetha pointed out, has given us an opportunity to create that leapfrogging, especially in countries like India. It's given us an opportunity to acknowledge and accept that traditional educational models have only worked for the top 10% of the population. And this pause of schools being closed for 16 to 18 months now is an opportunity for us to build back differently. The second lens around that, if I deep dive into the systemic inequities that Suchetha was talking about, sometime in February, March, I traveled around the country to Bihar, rural Telangana, Himachal Pradesh, Jharkhand, and I was interacting with young people between the age group of 12 to about 18. And these are just their own reflections of the pandemic. So 15, 16-year-old young women in Telangana shared with me that they spent their year working with their parents on picking cotton in cotton fields, while their brothers and other friends who were boys got access to smartphones to attend online classes. In Bihar, young men and women didn't even have access to devices, and families had come down to one meal a day So there was absolutely no priority given to education, of course, because livelihood and hunger were the primary drivers of survival. In Himachal, talking to a bunch of young women again, one young woman shared that she had 56 girls in her ninth grade class. And through the year of the pandemic, 25 of those girls had been married off. And her biggest fear was not that in March she had examinations, but that her parents might also push her to get married. In fact, one of her friends who lived in a border town had run away from home and was living with her because her parents were trying to get her married. Uh, so I think it's important to recognize these systemic inequities and not just make them into statistics. That these are real lives being impacted, and our education systems are not addressing some of the more complex challenges that these young people are facing. Pre-pandemic, definitely, but exaggerated and exacerbated because of the pandemic also.
Right. Sucheta and Vishal, both of you said that these inequalities and these challenges were something which were there before the pandemic also, but now they've just become very stark, visible, and manifestation is like very tangible. So it's really a kind of it's really made all of us think and triggered as to how we want to create an education which is now different in terms of transformation. Change is something that we are talking about rather than incremental change, as you mentioned. Dream a Dream has, of course, I mean, been doing fabulous work for so many years now. And do you feel, how do you think that the pandemic has kind of helped Dream a Dream adapt its work? Or how has Dream a Dream adapted its work with respect to addressing some of these challenges post the pandemic?
Sure. So for Dream a Dream, the challenge was, we looked at it. One was the immediate response, right? Because we were getting children who are calling us. They needed medical support, ambulances, access to beds. So there was that, and then just food, ration kits, money, electricity bills, right? Money to pay electricity bills and all of that. So there was that immediate relief and response that we needed to do. So both in the first wave and in the second wave, there was half of the team that was really working on providing ration kits. Right now, we're also doing direct benefit transfers to almost 5,000 children, giving teacher salaries, to 500 teachers for the last 4 months now. So that is part of the work, and that we had to adopt. We have never done this type of relief work, and we had to adapt and respond to that. But on the other side, it was, the recognition that there is so much stress and anxiety that children are going through. Right, this is something that we have been talking about for the last 21 years, that children do need life skills to be able to respond, like I said, to the fast pace of change in the world. But it had always seemed like something that's very far off, and most of the attention continued to go on just 10 standard marks or academic outcomes or just being able to read and write. That we feel has definitely changed. There is an increased recognition that children are facing stress, anxiety, trauma, and there is a role that teachers and the education system must play to respond to that and help children overcome that. Unfortunately, right now, the response is still very knee-jerk, very like, let's do one mental health session and then we'll be fine. Or, we'll ask the children, survey karte hain, let's talk on the phone and then they'll be fine. And then they can come back to school and everything can go back to normal, right? Without realizing that the amount of stress and anxiety and just the disconnection from normalcy and how children, the interactive environment, a community that children need to grow up in a healthy way and to grow even socially, emotionally, and psychologically, just not in terms of numeracy and literacy, was lost. So we are going to see behavioral challenges in children. We are going to see increased dropouts just because one is economic, but also because children just can't attend school, can't pay attention, can't get back to, studying academic subjects, preparing for exams. And unless the education system takes that into account, we are going to see increased dropouts, increased, lack of the ability to pass in exams, just a lack of ability to engage in structured learning. So while there is a recognition, then that has been good about mental health, life skills, social emotional skills that children need, there is still a long way to go to really integrate it as part of the education system itself and not like just a band-aid in response to the pandemic.
Just to add a couple of points to what Suchetha has shared. Sometime back at another event, we were talking to a bunch of young women again, sharing their experiences of the pandemic and what they missed about schools being closed. And the young women ranged from 11 to about 17 years old. All of them, the sharing was that they missed friends, they missed playing, they missed cultural events, they missed dancing, they missed theater, they missed hugs, they missed even just the teacher shouting at them, they missed the blackboard and the chalk. None of them said they missed any of the subjects. So, what we humans are wired towards is human connection and interaction. Uh, and that's what young people haven't got. Another teacher that I was talking to was sharing her own personal experience with me with her grandchild who was born in the first wave, and hadn't he and his family had not stepped out of the home for over a year. And when they finally did take the infant out after a year, just for a doctor's appointment, the infant was about a year old, clung to his dad, and was just scared and shocked with the level of people around and the noise around, because as an infant, he was not exposed to that and used to that. And what we have to recognize is that when something like this happens in the world, the trauma sits in our body. It's happened to all of us as adults. We were all seeing behavioral changes in all of us, levels of anxiety going up, palpitations going up. So imagine the impact on children and the trauma that's sitting inside their body.
Right. Um, thank you, Sucheta and Vishal, for your thoughts on this. When we talk about reaching out to children, ensuring that their socio-emotional well-being is addressed, teachers have a very important role to play. And at this point of time, teachers themselves are, not they themselves are under a lot of socio-emotional trauma and stress as well. Uh, h- how would you say that? I mean, what needs to be done with respect to teachers being the agents or the fulcrums through which we will be able to ensure the socio-emotional well-being of children in a context where teachers themselves are not completely safe
Yeah.
with regards to their own socio-emotional well-being.
Yeah.
Your thoughts, Sucheta and Vishal?
Yeah. So one is you're absolutely right? So that teachers are the fulcrum and they are really, almost the linchpin of, being able to create spaces where children can build their life skills, can build their social emotional learning. And what we have also learned over the many years is that a child just needs actually one caring adult. If there's just one caring adult that the child can reach out to, then that can create a transformative experience enough for the child to really help them fall life. So imagine the power of so many teachers that a child can get access to, and if they were to provide the environment, the space, the approach that can help children build life skills that can help them respond to this. So one is that it is true that they are the ones who can make this happen. Two, it's also right that no one can do it unless they themselves feel comfortable, their mental health is taken care of, they themselves feel safe and heard, and are able to reintegrate back post this pandemic. So we must invest in the mental health and social emotional health of teachers as well. And we can do that. We have been doing it at Dream a Dream. Just last year, we worked with almost 35,000 teachers, where through online sessions we helped them reintegrate. We basically ran reintegration sessions, which was to help teachers make sense of their experience of the pandemic and really process all the emotions and everything that they went through in the last year. So we must continue to do that. But the larger question for me is that I think uh, where it becomes problematic is if we just hold teachers to account and don't look at the ecosystem as a whole. Right? For teachers to feel safe, there must be an ecosystem that supports them as well. We do need an education system which prioritizes mental health of everyone across the board, starting with children, including teachers, and everyone involved. So that way, that's for me the bigger question, that as an ecosystem which includes everybody, definitely the administrators, political class, everybody who directly influences education and education policy, but also every one of us in society, as parents, as non-profit leaders, right, as influencers, are we really stressing on this need that we must focus on mental health and psychological health of students, of teachers, and that we must reimagine the purpose of education, not just to get marks and get a job, but to help everyone thrive, so that children are thriving, teachers are thriving, and as a society we are thriving. Where thriving is our ability to be resilient, to be happy, to be responsible, and to respond to these challenges from a space of empathy and creativity, and just more mindfulness than how we are right now. That would be my thoughts on that.
Right. Just to add to this question also, like the whole approach of Dream a Dream with respect to life skills, right? And essentially, like you had also mentioned, that the purpose of life skills is essentially to prepare children and to kind of make them resilient for such kind of situations which we are facing right now.
Yeah.
What has your experience been with respect to the children that Dream a Dream has worked with? How have they kind of are there any examples which you can share with us where you can say that, okay, they have kind of taken leadership, be it in their own family or community, to kind of help deal with the crisis which they and their families are facing?
Yeah. Vishal, you want to go?
Sure. That's a great question, Mashul, and we're actually very happy to talk about it because we saw this happen in the pandemic, especially our alumni who had been in a program from anything from 3 to 7 years. The way they showed up in response to not so much just the pandemic, but also the lockdown, the loss of livelihood, the challenges that their communities were facing was absolutely remarkable and inspiring. In fact, Dream a Dream's COVID response started because a group of alumni reached out and said, Dream a Dream needs to do something about it, and we are here to help. And there have been hundreds of stories that we have actually captured through the year of how our alumni have used their life skills to respond to the challenges in their communities. We had one young man, for example, when the lockdown happened, he was watching groups and groups of people walking for miles, going back to their villages. He lived in a neighborhood which was largely filled with garment factories, and they had all been, they had all lost their jobs, and they needed to walk back to their villages. So he started off by just giving them bottles of water and some bread and buns, just to take care of them. And then he quickly ran out of money. Then he started getting his friends involved and the extended community involved, and they would just stand at different junctions on the main road. And as people were walking, they would make sure they got water and food. And if they needed to talk or share something, then they were just available to listen. We had groups of young men and women in a certain community who started volunteering with the local municipal body on relief efforts, on medical support efforts, on testing efforts, including kind of encouraging community members to get tested, and now in this second wave, encouraging community members to get vaccinated. So, working on any kind of vaccine hesitancy that was there in the communities. And we had then groups of young people who started volunteering with us in our relief efforts. for days on month, actually for months, wearing PPE kits, going into communities, distributing food and rations, and doing it in a way that's empathetic yet efficient and effective, ensuring that no family went hungry. Then we had groups of alumni who started going home to home visits to just check on families if any of the kids were at risk of, say, maybe being pushed into child labor or maybe being married off. Then, having those conversations with the families and encouraging families to seek support outside so that they don't have to push the kids into labor or get them married off. Also, then some of them working with the local municipal corporation and holding them accountable for the services that they had promised and that were not reaching the communities. So also becoming active citizens in that case. So there were many, many, many stories of how young people showed up, one, supporting themselves and not getting demotivated. Second, supporting their families and ensuring that their families were safe and healthy and well taken care of. And third, more importantly, reaching out to their communities and ensuring the communities were taken care of.
It's wonderful to learn about these young people, and it must be so satisfying for your team to see alumni coming back and taking leadership over this. It's truly remarkable. Here, I would like to again go back to Suchetha's point of that. When we talk about accountability of teachers, right? So it is that it is something that is also under discussion. That your point is well taken, and it's truly important that the ecosystem has to be supportive. It has to ensure that the social emotional well-being, not just of the children but also of teachers and all the stakeholders, are well taken into care. When we have a national mission, of something like Nipun Bharat mission here, which talks about targets, which talks about clearly defined goals and a timeline, and talks about motivating or kind of leveraging all stakeholders and aligning them to this goal. So the challenge, do you think that national missions may add certain challenges with respect to having a target oriented approach, and in order to achieve those targets, which are which are clearly defined in the policy, there is going to be accountability pressures on all stakeholders, especially teachers, to deliver? And how do you see accountability of teachers going along with a system of ensuring that the stakeholders in the system, like teachers, their social emotional well-being is also taken care of? Do you think both of these can go together?
Sure.
I think it's a very complex question to address. Our own work and experience actually has taught us that outcomes that are focused on achievement of numeracy and literacy goals for a majority of children who are first generation schoolgoers, first generation learners, coming from experiences of marginalization and poverty, will not be achieved. And it's a wrong goal to pursue. Which means then you will start putting in place very strong accountability and monitoring measures, and you will put a lot more stress on the system on something that you know you're going to fail in. And why I say that is because I don't think we are reflecting and understanding the problem. The problem is not that children are not achieving foundational level numeracy literacy. That is the surface of the problem. The deeper challenge that we're not recognizing is that in the early years of growing up, 0 to 3, 0 to 5, 0 to 10 years, when children experience adverse circumstances in their life, which could be lack of food or nutrition, lack of emotional care, being abandoned, orphaned, lack of adequate care in the family, in extreme cases exposure to, say, violent environments or abuse at home or in the neighborhood, it impacts children's ability to achieve developmental milestones. And this is very well proven. There's enough research in the world which talks about every child achieving developmental milestones at an appropriate age. This includes height and weight, right? I mean, you would see that if you take a 10-year-old from a government school today and make them stand next to a 10-year-old from an international school, the height and weight is visibly there. And this is not just because of lack of food and nutrition. It is a combination of lack of food and nutrition and other adverse experiences. So when a child then does not have has not achieved developmental milestones, and then at the age of 3, 4 now enters into a structured learning environment where they're expected to learn the alphabet, learn the number, and then start performing some of these more structured functions, because the brain is not fully developed to engage with that learning, the child struggles. And then with every year, the gap increases. So, what you have not addressed in the foundational learning piece is helping a child achieve developmental milestones. And when the child achieves developmental milestones and age appropriate brain development, then for them to pick up literacy and numeracy is much easier. Now, some arguments do say that an investment in numeracy and literacy will support in the brain development. It will not if the focus is more on these kind of accountability measures and stresses into the system. How does a child achieve age appropriate developmental milestones? In environments that are safe, that are creative, that are empathetic, that are filled with care, that are non judgmental, where a teacher is not judging a child and calling the child stupid or a slow learner because the child is struggling, but the teacher is recognizing that there have been adverse experiences and I need to help the child overcome those adverse experiences and achieve developmental milestones. So what we need is foundational achievement of developmental milestones, not foundational numeracy and literacy. And we all know again from research that when we achieve foundational developmental milestones, outcomes in numeracy and literacy can also be achieved in 2 to 3 months. We don't need 3 years to achieve that. So are we then going after the wrong solution because we have not understood the problem?
And the second lens to that, I would add, Masud, is what you're saying that, if these accountability practices are measures are actually going to increase the stress of teachers, then it comes back to that. What are we measuring as success? Right? If success leads to, if the definition of success is creating stress and anxiety, then there's something fundamentally wrong. Right? We have to make well-being as the outcome of this. It cannot be a side mein karo while we continue to do everything, exam bhi karte hain, test bhi karte hain, we'll filter out the best 10%, keep moving them to IIT. As long as these success measures remain competitive and exclusionary, it will result in stress and anxiety and indicators of performance, which, just increase mental health challenges for children and for teachers. So all of us should be held accountable, including teachers. Everybody doing a professional role should be held accountable to goals. But what are the goals that you're holding us accountable to? Right? And across society, but definitely for teachers, if the goals you're holding them accountable to is creating stress and anxiety, that is what we must change. Not to say that, if I focus on well-being of teachers, they won't be accountable. That's a crap argument, unfortunately. Right? Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Suchetha and Vishal, for sharing your thoughts on that. When we talk about again, another point which I wanted to elaborate more or kind of focus more on was where we talked about in the long term, right? So in the short term, etc. I mean, we are kind of, it's a question of survival. So a lot of focus is on kind of mitigation and making sure that we don't lose our children permanently as well. But what do you sense would be, what is your assessment of how the current pandemic, with its impact on the economy, on the social fabric, what kind of, do you feel that this has necessitated kind of new skills which children need to develop, and all of us need to kind of actively work on it at a systemic level? What would your assessment be on that?
Vishal?
Uh, I think the first step is for us as adults to develop a new set of skills and ways of being. uh, we are all products of an education system that has pushed us to be competitive, pushed us into work and careers that are extractive and impacting the planet in the way they're impacting, have pushed us to be more self-centered and self-indulgent. uh, I know I grew up in a very competitive educational environment, and it kind of almost has become part of my being. And I had to literally work hard on taking my competitive DNA out. Uh, but as we are seeing, the world facing more complex challenges with the climate crisis, with misinformation and fake news, with polarities, with religious fundamentalism impacting the communal harmony of the world itself. Uh, what we need as a society, and I say we, which includes the adults, is more skills around tolerance and care and empathy and creativity and listening and being still, more mindfulness based practices. Uh, and that's what our children need. Imagine a scenario. If I just take a city like Bangalore, Bangalore is increasingly year on year running out of fresh drinking water. And when that does happen, which did happen in other parts of the world, in Cape Town it happened, uh, how do we expect our children to respond to that? Do we expect our children to then fight with each other and say, this is my bucket of water and belongs to me, and I don't care if you or your family suffers and dies? Or do we want our children to say, okay, this is a solution, this is a problem for all of us. How do we find a solution that supports everyone with empathy and care? And this is a reality. This is going to happen, right? We know this is going to happen. So it is a huge opportunity for us now to completely rewire our approach to the world itself, and invest in our children developing skills of care and empathy, so that they can grow up to deal with these complex challenges, which we as adults have created and we have failed to address them.
And if I may just add, and again going back to that point that like you also mentioned that teachers, adults are products of an education system or a society which itself often does not pay a lot of give a lot of sensitivity to issues of community and of sharing and all, and so and competition is kind of ingrained in us within from the school education system. uh, are there any successes with Dream and Dream, or of any other initiative where you feel that like how do we kind of help teachers to one kind of change their own belief system with respect to uh, how in the future we'll have to kind of solve problems together, etc., and then they kind of integrate that into their education system. And we also see like a lot of narrow focus often, that okay, math teacher will teach math, science teacher will teach science. Do we need a separate life skills teacher to talk about all these things? So what has your experience been with respect to working with teachers to kind of integrate these very important teaching skills in the class?
Uh, yeah, Sucheta, go ahead.
So let me share an experience of, like I said, that while the teachers are important, it is the entire ecosystem. So I don't know if you've heard, but the happiness curriculum in Delhi was launched in 2018, and we were part of, we were like the anchor, we are the anchor non-profit that helps the Delhi government conceptualize it, build capacity, monitor, evaluate, and all of that in Delhi even today. And for me, the happiness curriculum was a great example as a starting step, because the happiness curriculum was introduced by the Delhi government after a series of other reforms that were needed for something like happiness to happen. For example, they invested in infrastructure, they invested in teacher capacity building, salaries of teachers, right? Just making children feel safe and comfortable coming to school, making sure government schools looked, felt, and you had a sense of pride for it, like you would if you were going to a high-end private school. So all of that basic foundation was done, and then they introduced the happiness curriculum from kindergarten to grade 8. That's what we saw after 1 year of doing the program. So the happiness curriculum completely focuses 50% of the time on mindfulness, the other 50% on building these life skills, right? Gratitude, respect, expression, emotional regulation, and all of that is integrated into the happiness curriculum. And teachers are trained. We had a set of teachers who developed the curriculum, and we were a team that developed it together, and almost 1024 teachers who were trained as happiness coordinators. Now these were not separate teachers, these were typically the class teacher, who was also then assigned the role of the happiness coordinator. And as part of the training, that's what we help them build, the ability to facilitate, to respond, to pick up the emotions of children, to ask questions, to get children to reflect, to get children to go and build better relationships at home, to think about themselves in the context of society, to think about happiness with a more nuanced understanding of what that means. Those were the skills that we built in the teachers. And then what we saw, first though, anecdotally, we saw that once a teacher has that shift, right, where she sees herself as a facilitator and not just, I have the knowledge and I must pour that down your throat, to really seeing I'm a facilitator, she is that facilitator in every class. Then it's not just a happiness class where she facilitates and then she goes back to teaching math in a didactic way. She just understands that children respond better when you build healthy relationships, when you have a fun, engaging classroom. So that we saw change. And as then we did impact studies, that's what even the Brookings Institute did a impact study on the happiness curriculum, the impact of the curriculum. And that's what they said, that teachers are valuing, this emotional, they're basically giving more prominence to values over academic outcomes. They are realizing that the relationship that they're building with children is having a positive impact on the children's ability to concentrate. They're realizing that, the classrooms are more fun and engaging for them and for the children because they're bringing these practices into the classroom. So that's kind of what I mean by it's just a teacher. You just can't train a teacher and say, go do this. We have done that and we see limited success in a model like that, which is why we insist that even when we train teachers, it should be the whole school. If I'm doing it, in just a school setting. But the best example we have seen is when the entire system puts its weight behind this idea that the purpose of education has to be reimagined and broadened and move just beyond academic outcomes. And then you invest in the teachers, then the way the teachers take it on is it's just a pleasure to watch. And then it was never the lack of intent. It was on the teacher's part, right? It is definitely the lack of intent overall as a system and some capacity building that teachers do need to be able to do that.
Right. Thank you, Suchetha, for sharing your thoughts on that. I think I mean, you really kind of triggered, both of you have triggered a lot of thoughts in terms of, how we look at not just, like foundational learning, which has been a focus of our detox so far. You can kind of, helped us completely kind of, ask ourselves a very different set of questions with respect to when we are talking about national missions and when we are talking about foundational literacy and numeracy, universal for everyone. It's very important not to kind of look at it in isolation with all these systemic challenges and also keeping the social emotional well-being of the child at the very center of it, right? Because often a lot of conversations which we've had are with respect to, okay, which pedagogy is the best, and accountability of teachers, etc. But you brought in a very unique and kind of important perspective into this forum. So I'm very, very grateful to both of you for bringing that in. In conclusion, I would like both of you to kind of just share your thoughts on when you're talking about like systemic transformation has to be kind of at a very center of all these different things that like be it life skills, be it foundational literacy, numeracy. I mean, it is part of a larger system which impacts each other. What do you feel should be like action points for civil society organizations? How can kind of they help in this systemic transformation? And I ask this because often civil society organizations talk about aligning with the current system rather than kind of affecting, kind of transformational change, right? Transformational change often is very scary for government stakeholders. What would your message be to civil society organization of how they can facilitate this systemic change, which both of you have pointed out very strongly? Suchetha and Vishal.
Vishal?
I think we can probably just share our own reflections and experiences, and I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it. Our own experiences has taught us when we started working with government systems is that what the government wants to do, they're very good at executing. So rather than we going in with here's my product, here's my service, here's my solution, take it and spread it. If we actually spend time in listening to the government and understanding what are their challenges and pain points and seeing if I can adapt my solution, my approach to address that, there's a higher likelihood of buy-in into the system. So that's one, just listening. Second, relationships with the government, one has to see it as a journey and not as a project. It's not a 1 year, 2 year project. You get an MOU, you sign and you do it. But it requires intentional investment in relationships across the board. So our approach across the work with the government has been to build relationships with individuals, build relationships with schools, school teachers, principals, build relationships with departments of education, with your SCRT, with the teacher training system, build relationships with the ministry, and those relationships have to be built on a premise of listening, validation, and trust. At Dream, we encourage ourselves to be actually more slow than fast, because we believe that if we invest in building trust in the system, then things move much faster because there is inherent trust. But if you just push towards speed and action right in the beginning without building trust, the first time we have a conflict or a disagreement, then the whole thing just breaks apart. So go slow to go fast later, rather than go fast now and then experience a breakup later. So that's our second experience with the government. The third piece around that is teachers have already understood and recognized and accepted that the conventional system of learning is not working for the children, for majority of children in the public education system. And they're waiting for change to happen. And the minute they see something that is helping them move towards this new way of learning and this new purpose of education, they embrace it. They embrace it wholeheartedly. Actually, there is very little resistance from the system. The resistance comes because they distrust you, not because they don't understand what you're trying to do. The minute they learn to trust you, they understand where you're coming from, it aligns with where they're at, then things move much faster. So yeah, those are the 3 points from me.
Yeah, and same, I think another dimension I might add to that is what you're saying around alignment versus, to ask ourselves, we are a 21-year-old organization, but we started working with the government just 4 years back, right? And one of the reasons for that is when we started off, life skills was not considered important. Well-being was like, no, kids don't know to read and write up. Well-being ki baat kar rahe ho, right? It was considered almost elitist, and like we were not in touch with the reality of children. So we had to wait almost 16, 17 years to get that buy-in. So that's kind of what so there is alignment. I agree with everything that Vishal has said. We must align with the government. We must not approach it from a space of I'm the expert, but we must also offer them something that they don't have. Right? That is the role of a non-profit, of a civil society, that we do innovations, we do these pilots, we try these things out, right? We build impact assessment measures, we build training modules, and then we offer them something that they can then scale. So that should also be the role versus trying to help them fix a problem that they could have fixed on their own, and just trying to kind of again do band-aid solutions versus offering real innovation and real depth of an alternative possibility.
Right. On that note, Suchetha and Vishal, truly really appreciate both of you being here for giving us your valuable time and for really kind of shaking up this forum here at the Detox with respect to how do we approach foundational literacy and numeracy, foundational learning. It is something which I mean you've really helped us kind of broaden our outlook and kind of horizon on what are the different aspects that need to be covered, and like FLN specifically need not be just kind of learning to read or do math, but if you really want to do that, then there's so much more at the systemic level and at the well-being level of children that needs to be addressed. So thank you really for helping us think on those lines. And to all those who are joining us live and who will be watching this video, we hope that you've learned from Suchetha's and Vishal's experience, while of course Dream and Dream works more on life skills, etc. But I think the learnings and the experiences that they have shared are really can be kind of put to use in all other aspects and levels of education. So thank you once again, Suchetha and Vishal, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for
Thank you,
having us.
Mashood.